Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again. For those of you who just joined us, welcome, and I hope you're enjoying your status. My name is Onkgopotse Tabane, and I'm going to be the moderator for the evening. Minister Kigaba, just to acknowledge you, welcome, and thank you so much for making the time. We know again that there's competing interests on your diary and you chose to prioritize us. Also to welcome the IDC CEO, Mr. Jeffrey Kleiner. Thank you very much for being here. And all the other panelists who will be welcome throughout the evening, all protocol observed, as well as welcoming also the chairperson of Pholosang, the company that's your host tonight, Ms. Christine Kunda, who will address us shortly. Black economic empowerment evokes emotion. It's about a new gain for those who may have been marginalized before, but it also means a loss of privilege for those who are accustomed to it. It can never be an easy subject, therefore, to digest. That's why we thought, let's make it the subject matter for frank dialogue, where we are hopefully going to speak frankly about whether or not such a thing called BEE has succeeded or has it failed. Before I invite our chairperson, just to trigger your mind to say, really BEE is about answering 7 quick questions. Who owns your business? That's the first question that BEE asks. And in the first few years of BEE, if you answered that, you'll be fine. You just have to get a billionaire. Maybe we already know the 3 names that you may wonder about when you talk about BEE. But you just get these people, you earn 25%, then you are fine. Then government can leave you alone and not bother you. You own 25%. You've answered the question, who owns my business? Who runs your business? That's your second question. Right? Who is employed in your business? Which enterprises does your business support? Are you happy to say, well, we can't find black enterprises? Terribly sorry, so we'll just stick to those we know. Who's on your supply chain? That's the question you need to answer. Are you happy for people on your supply chain to have last been vetted in 1948, or would you want somebody who was vetted last week because they've started a new business? Which communities do you invest in? Now, those are the 7 questions you answer. So if you say, let's not ask these questions because this BE has been too much, or can we find a different answer to these questions? And I think today, as we debate this, that's what we're going to be talking about. Christine Kunda needs no introduction. She is a well-known personality in our country. She's been a lawyer in Cape Town. She's sued quite a number of people in our country for various things. So, you can understand that she would easily be a crusader to fight fraud and corruption easy, because she has done it in her lifetime. And even in these times where she's taking it easy now, after she has done her part really and her bit for her country, she's found a way to start Pholosang BEE resolution services. Let's welcome her to open this seminar formally, as well as welcome us to this frank dialogue. Over to you, Christine.
Evening, everyone, and thanks for giving up your Friday evening. I hope we won't be boring, and I hope we won't keep you very long, or not longer than is necessary. Let me start off by explaining how Pholosang came about. Pholosang is a multidisciplinary professional or integrated professional services company. We do legal consultancy service, we do forensic accounting, we do business restructuring, and we are focused on the Black economic empowerment sector. We were inspired to start this company by observing a number of Black economic empowerment companies and transactions that went wrong. And particularly the issue of fraud that I think is not exposed in the media very much, but actually is very widespread. And because it's not exposed in the media, it creates a situation where the fraudsters believe that they are untouchable. And because of that, you have a situation where people become billionaires and multimillionaires, and the black participants of an enterprise become financially destitute. I can tell you now of the cases that we are doing now, none of them, the amounts involved, none of them are below 100 million. And all the victims of that kind of fraud are financially destitute. They've lost their homes, they've lost their cars, and it's actually quite heartbreaking. So it's a complete frustration of government's policies, and we felt that we needed to do something about it. So, and what we do, so that's one part. We represent black shareholders that have been defrauded. We also structure black economic transactions so that the sort of problems we encounter now are prevented. We also do advocacy work. As you can see, this is part of our advocacy work as Pholosang, these frank dialogues. And we hope that it would not just be a talk shop, but that in fact, at some point, some practical results will come out. What we don't have there, but we also have 1 or 2 research projects, which we hope we will start in the course of this year, which will, when we complete those research projects, they would be made available to both government and to the private sector to see if something can be done about redressing some of the fundamental and systemic problems involved in black economic empowerment. What we found with our work, typically you have fronting where businesses are engaged in work with the government. And often what we found is that state-owned enterprises don't do enough to either try and prevent that kind of fraud, or when the fraud is taken to these state-owned enterprises and complaints are made to officials within there is insufficient support and redress. And there are 1 or 2 reasons for that in our experience. The first reason is that, firstly, and unfortunately, some of the officials within this government departments or the state-owned enterprises may have some corrupt dealings with usually the white businesses. We found that very, very much. The second reason is that state-owned enterprises will say, but these are shareholder disputes and we do not want to be involved, which is incorrect, because when fraud is brought to your attention, I would expect that a state-owned enterprise would step in. And like the media who ignores private sector fraud and focuses on public sector fraud, I just believe that state-owned enterprises should be more proactive. And in our submission to Parliament of the new bill, we've certainly seen that the Trade and Industry Department has now compelled state-owned enterprises to get involved where there are allegations of fronting, because as you know, in the new bill, fronting and other unethical practices will become a criminal offense. I just quickly want to talk about some of the experiences or the observations we've made about how these fronting exercises take place. Typically, and often, it's quite established, reputable companies that do this. They have the main company, but they don't do the BE transaction within that company. They set up subsidiaries and they isolate the main company and put up these subsidiaries and enter into contracts with state-owned enterprises. And the fraud takes place within those companies in that they set up a number of agreements between the main entity and the BE ventures. And they basically, what is the word? I think if you had assets, they asset strip the JV entity, and they do it very effectively. And often black shareholders go into these transactions without independent legal advice and without understanding the nature of the business they are buying in. And we see this, and very much regulatory bodies are not a solution. We've approached some very senior regulatory bodies. They just turn a blind eye because it's an old network, the old white male network, actually supersede their commitment to ensuring that they properly regulate a particular entity. And I can tell you, at least 3 of the cases we do, that's what they've done. Fronting dislodges true empowerment. It's been 19 years since our democracy. The interventions that government have sought to do cannot be left to government only. I think the private sector and the established white private sector has to assist. But we found in our experience that they are some of the most resistant of companies. The issue that we often come across is that they believe that the black shareholders don't add value and that they are doing these shareholders a favor by engaging them, or they find that it's a big bother. And I think something has to be done, because if we continue on this path, we will find a level of frustration. One, the economy will not grow because, let me explain what I said to someone, a client last week. Instead of that client being a good taxpayer, these clients have been defrauded by about 150 million. And over a period of 5 years, they have been basically rendered destitute. What that does, they cease to be taxpayers, they cease to be employers, they cease to be even a small or big business, and they become a burden on the state and on their family, whereas they could have sent people to education, and I'm talking about the typical African family, which is the extended family. So instead of being able to do that and being a consumer and assisting the economy to grow, they are absolutely destitute. And in that sense, to me, it appears that fronting and unethical conducts in black economic empowerment is not only a frustration of government policies, but it's also preventing economic growth. And in a sense, it's almost some kind of economic sabotage. And something has to be done because it's a very, very serious issue. Thank you. I will hand it back to JJ.
Let me call on to Minister Malusi Gigaba to address us. Minister Malusi Gigaba really has had his hands full ensuring that public enterprises step up to the plate in dealing with issues of development, issues of economic development. And surely BEE sits right at the center of it all. Minister Gigaba, let me give you to address us in your keynote.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think the first point to make is that black economic empowerment was the political choice our democracy made at the point of its advent. Given the history we had come from, the history which continues to bedevil our country even today. So the first point that I want to make is that given the stage where we are, South Africa needs more and not less broad-based black economic empowerment. Quite clearly, when you read the National Development Plan, whose very theme, our future, make it work, captures aptly the principal focus of the plan and what must preoccupy the minds of all South Africans. You can appreciate the gravity of the political choice that we have made, because this future that we seek will not be achieved or achievable unless we can take decisive measures to pursue an inclusive economy, shared wealth, because the very foundation of South African society today is inclusion. The journey we must traverse to this future, which the NDP exhorts us to make it to work, proceeds from the premise articulated in the Constitution of the Republic, which says that we, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of the past. We honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land. We respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. Acknowledging, therefore, this historic injustice experienced and suffered by the majority of South Africans, we are reminded by the Constitution that the basic tenet of the new dispensation is unity and inclusion. And that therefore, to reverse the centuries of political oppression, economic exploitation, and gender discrimination, you need processes that are going to correct those injustices, corrective action, and bring about the inclusion of these people, many of whom continue even today to face disadvantage. I think, unless I am totally naive, I think this audience doesn't expect me to stand here to justify black economic empowerment. But if I am to, I'll be willing to do it later when we debate. I say so because I know of the fact that there are some who argue that there is no longer any need for black economic empowerment, affirmative action, employment equity, who claim that we now live in an equal opportunities society. An equal opportunities society in which if you had a 100-meter race, black South Africans start the race at the 100th meter and white South Africans at the 80th meter. So the equal opportunities don't exist. You look at employment equity figures released yesterday, you look at JSE ownership, you look at employment opportunities released by the Stellenbosch University. I think the argument against black economic empowerment defeats itself. Because data is not there to back the argument that BEE is no longer required. But I would like to admit tonight that meeting this objective of black economic empowerment has not been without its challenges. For example, we have in the past focused a great deal of our BEE on share ownership, on skills development, but those do not effect radical transformation in the structure of the economy. For us to radically to transform the structure of the economy, you need a deliberate program to develop black industrialists and small and micro enterprise, black-owned, youth-owned, women-owned enterprises. So I want to argue that in line with the shift in the country towards greater focus on socio-economic freedom, we need to increase our focus on the SMME sector, on developing entrepreneurs, on developing black industrialists. And I believe that this calls into sharp focus, in general, the role of the state, but in particular, the role of state-owned companies. The question really before us is, do we have the courage to move on to the next level? Because I think the resources are there. Are we able to galvanize the procurement spend of our state-owned companies and the public sector, and through that to enforce change in the very conservative private sector and bring on board new black players in the economy? I believe that the procurement spend of the state-owned companies will change the economic landscape of South Africa and contribute to creating a diversified private sector in terms of race, gender, and class. But this requires that this program be driven deliberately, and that the state assumes a frontline role in that regard. In so saying, I am by no means, because there is a mistake we commit when we criticize or critique BEE as it has unfolded. We therefore jump to the extreme conclusion that seeks to condemn it. And by so doing, unwittingly join forces with our more conservative detractors who wouldn't support BEE in as much as they would never have supported the liberation we achieved in 1994. But in critiquing BEE as it has unfolded, based on a transactional model, we must not neglect the positive outcomes it has had in imposing binding constraints in the economy. We have made many achievements in this regard, and this has allowed many black people, black South Africans, to participate in the economy at a different level other than that which the apartheid colonial system had engendered, where all black people were workers In the portfolio I am entrusted with, I have instructed our companies to enter into business transactions that change the character of the sector. Because we understand that industry charters which allocated 26% ownership to black and African people were a product of political compromise. And nearly a second decade later, time has come for us to not only review, but to also increase the tempo of transformation. For example, many of the state-owned companies in our portfolio have appointed black audit firms as their external and internal service providers, with Transnet leading the way. You don't know, unless you are involved in the process, you will not appreciate fully just the value of decisive leadership in saying that this is what is going to happen and I will take nothing less. Secondly, at ESCOM, we are working on a program for emerging coal miners that will change the empowerment game in the sector, in the mining sector, resulting in ESCOM procuring 50% plus one of their coal from black miners by 2018. The Competitive Supplier Development Program is primarily aimed at creating black industrialists who will become game changers in the field of black economic empowerment. We've got to create more supplier sectors through the localization program and our infrastructure development program and the beneficiation program. The challenge is to ensure that there is focus and coordination at the level of the state, that the state has the capacity to implement these programs, but above all else, that it has the political will to implement them. Of course, if we dilly-dally, we will not achieve these objectives. But really the point that I am trying to make is that one, we need more black economic empowerment, and two, that we need to change the game to introduce new elements that move beyond the models of black economic empowerment we've implemented up to now, to actually move ourselves out of the bounds created by the historic compromises of 1993 at CODESA. That three, you need the state to have the political will to drive these programs so that about Jeff and other CEOs of our state-owned companies, the DGs of our departments, make the political decision that their procurement spend is going to be directed. And as Mrs. Christine was saying, they are going to fight to develop the mechanisms to fight fronting. And fourth, that we need to create capacity in our state to enforce transformation. Radical, meaningful transformation. And fifth, that we must be unapologetic in doing so. Thank you.
Applause there. Thank you very much, Minister. That was quite frank. And I hope that we can maintain that standard throughout the evening. Let me call on the CEO of IDC, Mr. Jeffrey Klina, to address us in response to that. And then we'll then have one more speaker, and then we'll then get the debate going.
Thank you, Program Director. Let me thank Sis Christine for affording the IDC an opportunity to be part of this frank dialogue. As IDC, over the last 10 years, we've approved about, let's say, 80 billion rands. of which about 50% of that, give or take, went to companies that are black empowered. Those are companies that have got 25% or more. Of which, if we say, let's look at those that have are owned, that are 50%.